Let's go live to Greg Sheridan, foreign editor at The Australian. Greg, that was quite some news conference with President Trump under a fair bit of pressure. How's it playing out in your view in the United States?
Kieran, the fascinating thing is that unlike almost every other country in the world, the coronavirus in the US has just become part of the partisan narrative. I thought, by the way, that was a standard Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers dance that the CBS reporter pulled at the press conference. She wasn't trying to get an answer to anything. She was trying to create a bit of video footage in which she is the star by being rude to the president. So the more that reporters do that, of course, the more this fires up Trump's base. Now, Trump is subject to some legitimate criticism for the slowness in the US response to coronavirus. But so is every other government in the world. I can remember when the outbreak was already very severe in Italy, writing that France and Germany were still allowing football games, everybody to go to the restaurants, all the rest of it, and they already had cases. Now, every country in the world would have had fewer cases if it had shut down earlier. The same in Australia. I mean, our medical people did a brilliant job in preparing our hospitals for the virus. But if we had banned international travel a month earlier, if we had banned everybody going on cruise ships, there would have been fewer cases. Now, I had a look at the whole Fauci interview where Anthony Fauci is supposed to have criticised the president. That's really all he was saying. I mean, it was, if you look at everything he said, it was pretty much moderate and in context. But the sad thing for the US is that the virus is just another oppositional, partisan, competing narratives. Trump supporters will believe he's done a good job. Trump's haters will believe he's the devil. And even the virus doesn't change American politics.
When you look at, well, that's a very good point because it is such a polarised nation in so many ways. Let's look at the United Kingdom, though, because this is the most extraordinary week I can remember, really, in the British leadership. You've had Johnson in hospital for a week, in intensive care for 3 nights. They almost lost their Prime Minister to coronavirus. And then that very powerful statement upon his release from hospital, Greg.
Yeah, so Boris Johnson is a really gifted communicator, and it shows the benefit of a politician coming from a journalistic background. So, Kieran, I'm a bit old for a career in politics, but I think you should step forward. I mean, this video that he did was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. Now, he didn't catch coronavirus on purpose, and nobody would say catching this virus is good luck. But what it has done is provide a framework, a narrative framework of Johnson in a completely heroic mould. And he has responded to it brilliantly because he's been extremely modest about himself. He's thanked the care workers who looked after him, and he's thanked them by name. And every editor knows, you name the names, a story is much more powerful with names in it. And then he's made it a hymn of praise to the National Health Service, which is Britain's most trusted institution, and to the British people. Now, partly as a result, his approval ratings are going through the ceiling. And the British government, by the way, could equally be criticised, like the Americans, for responding a bit late to this crisis. Johnson, like Trump, has a genius for getting ordinary people to identify with him, even though he comes from a, very upper-class, elite, privileged background. But I thought that video that he did, which was plainly his voice, it reeked of Boris Johnson. That is the genius. That's why he's never lost a competitive election. He ran in the 1990s in a safe Labor seat and didn't win that. But every election which has been competitive for the Conservatives, where he's been the candidate, he's won. And that video helps explain why.
It certainly does, and thank goodness he pulled through for that country. It's hard to imagine what would have happened, but let's look at the Chinese influence. And, of course, we know that the virus came from Wuhan province, but I'm interested in your view on the WHO, the World Health Organization, and the way that they've been managing this crisis. Are they completely under the thumb of the Chinese right now?
Yeah, the WHO is excessively influenced by China, which has been very effective in using money and campaign techniques to influence a certain number of multilateral organisations. Now, people criticise Trump for not being a liberal internationalist and a multilateralist. The WHO was against travel bans when Trump and Morrison imposed the travel bans on China. The WHO said early on there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission of this virus, echoing China's propaganda line. The WHO did not declare this a pandemic until very, very late in the piece. And we know that during these weeks when China knew it had a serious outbreak, it was going around the world buying up protective personal equipment, face masks, ventilators, all the rest of it, for its system, while it was not telling the international community the seriousness of the problem at home. And now the WHO has endorsed China reopening these notorious wet markets. Now, I've spent, as you know, Kieran, a lot of time in Asia. I've seen wet markets all over Asia, in Thailand, in Indonesia, even in Taiwan some years ago. But we have had now global pandemic virus after global virus emerging out of these Chinese wet markets. And you would think if the WHO had one speck of credibility or integrity or decency, it would ask the Chinese government to abolish these wet markets, instead of which it is doing what it always does, lamely following the Chinese line. Now, it's been a theme of my writing that this virus is a tremendous blow to globalisation. It's also a tremendous blow to liberal internationalism, because the liberal international institutions have failed in this crisis. None has failed as badly as the WHO, but none has made a significant positive contribution either. And Scott Morrison was absolutely right today to describe the WHO's decision as unfathomable.
And one question before you go, Greg. We've got to Cardinal PELL on with Andrew Bolt this evening. What's your take on where this goes to in terms of the Vatican response and Pope Francis?
Well, I think the Vatican will take no action against the Cardinal. I think the Cardinal was well advised to flee the Victorian jurisdiction. I think Premier Andrews' remarks on this matter have been bizarre and disgraceful. He said he didn't want to say anything because he'd be in contempt of the High Court. He is in effect setting the Victorian legal system against the High Court. He's setting the Victorian legal system against the national legal system. He is in effect giving a bit of a wink and a nod to the kind of shocking anti-Catholic vandalism we saw at St Patrick's Cathedral. Now, one of the dangers of this situation is that the people who are committed PELL haters in the ABC and in the Victorian judicial system will want to vindicate themselves by finding new bizarre charges to charge the Cardinal with. And then again, we'll have a long process where these charges wend their weary way through the courts. The Victorian government, Premier and political and legal system, except for the Victorian opposition, have shown no signs at all of understanding just what a travesty they have produced and how improper their actions have been. And this could go anywhere because, rogue prosecutions could come up again. But as for the Vatican, I don't think they'll be taking any action against Cardinal PELL, nor would I expect Cardinal PELL to resume his position in the Vatican.
Greg Sheridan, as always, I appreciate your time. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks.
Thanks, Kieran.
You can watch that exclusive with George Pell and Andrew Bolt tonight on Sky News. It's a must-see interview airing at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.